Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Agency Side Podcast. I'm your host, Justin Levinson, and I'm here today with James Nord, who is the founder of Fohr, which is a really exciting creative agency, and I'm excited to hear his story. James, so great to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. It's an absolute pleasure.
Yeah. So let's get into it just to give our viewers, who might not already be familiar with your agency, what exactly you guys are doing over there.
Yeah. We are a influencer marketing agency and technology platform. We were the first influencer marketing platform in the world when we launched 13 years ago or so, and have added services. Throughout that time, we added services and built a pretty big agency business, and have about 350,000 creators on the platform as well.
Wow. Wow, that's amazing. And where are you based out of currently?
I'm in I'm in New York in the Lower East Side.
Cool.
Yeah.
And do you guys have all like remote employees, or do you guys have a lot of people coming into office, or how does
We
that?
try and keep it we try and keep it in office. I just realized I think yesterday it was maybe the 5-year anniversary of closing the office down for COVID. And even then I was like, from the very beginning, I was like, look, we're never going to be a remote first company. Like, in person is important to me. Um, and I think important to, like, we have a lot of younger people that work there. They move to New York. They don't move to New York to sit in their apartments with their roommates they met on Craigslist that they maybe kind of hate. They're here to come. It's amazing how many people we get coming to interview for us, being like, I'm leaving my job because it's remote and I want to be at a place that has in person. Now, I also think I would be like Marie Antoinette if I tried to go back to 5 days a week,
Yeah,
but we're currently only three.
that's great. Yeah, that sounds like the signature model there. Kind of
Yeah.
give everybody a little bit of what they need. But yeah, there does seem to be a bit of an unfair advantage for having that sort of collaboration and people coming into office, knowing each other, and being sharing creative ideas together.
I think so. Yeah. And, you talk to a lot of creative agencies, and, I don't know how you replicate you know, the ability to sit in a room and kind of be wasting time, like, but like trying to think through a creative idea. I think there's a different pacing that happens remote where it feels like once you fire up a Zoom, you're just kind of waiting for it to end. Um,
Yeah,
and it feels like something you're supposed to like wrap up, and so I think that is so important. And I think also, like, part of creativity is building enough trust with the people around you to say something stupid, or that, and again, I don't know how you build that remotely, and so yeah, it's always been like kind of a non-starter for us, so we've never had to think too much about it. But yeah, really, it's always nice to have a nice full office. I would say, I'm in here 5 days a week, so Monday and Friday, it's a little lonely in here, but rest of the week it's good.
yeah, man. Well, maybe you can tell us how you got into this particular space and your journey leading up to being a founder of Four.
Yeah. So it started with Tumblr. I had kind of started the Tumblr early. I had built a following in 2008, 2009. I was one of the most followed people on Tumblr. And that was not saying much. The internet was a much smaller place back then. But I was just walking around the city with my camera, and taking photos. I wanted to try and shoot for brands. I'm from Georgia. I didn't know anyone in New York. I didn't know anyone in fashion. And I I started just sending off cold emails to CEOs of fashion companies saying, like, "Hey, Prada CEO, there's this whole conversation in fashion happening on the internet, and you're not part of it." And at the time, fashion company like Prada's website in 2011 was just an image that said Prada. You couldn't buy. There was no e-com. There was nothing. And so, like, I wish the story was that worked and I got all these cool jobs. That did not work. I ended up meeting someone at Tumblr who introduced me to the team at Oscar de la Renta. I shot for them. Um, and then I started shooting for all of these brands, and the brands, I wasn't that good of a photographer. They wanted me to shoot because I was going to be posting it on my Tumblr as well. And I got sent on the first like influencer trip ever. Puma sent a group of us to Dubai to shoot a yacht race. I remember I came home from that trip and I thought, I think a lot of brands are going to want to do more of this stuff, this work, right? And that we need, some of my friends were making some money off of their blogs, but they were just running AdSense and like AdWords on it. And I thought the post should be the ad, but that we needed data and analytics to be able to turn it into a type of media. And so I found that we could pull data from the social platforms APIs. And so, created a platform to help brands find influencers. They were called bloggers then. And once they found them, to be able to verify their stats. And so I quit my job and raised a little bit of money and launched that in late 2012.
Wow, that's brilliant. So it kind of a warm lead kind of got you into the door there,
Yeah.
and
Well,
also building up such a following of your
yeah,
own.
my life changed so much because of that one introduction. I'd spent 6 months trying to get a foot into this industry, and I met somebody that was super connected. They sent one email. My life totally changed. And I thought, you know, there are so many talented people out there with a following that don't have that network. And this is the thing the internet does so well. It removes that middle name. It can create a more like egalitarian space. And I thought that building technology to do this would open that up for a lot more people, which we've been fortunate to be able to do.
Yeah. But now I imagine you're, as a sort of the founder and running the ship, your role is probably a lot different now. Is a lot more delegation, and you got a full team. What does the scope of your position look like now that you are where you are?
Yeah. So we're like 90 people. And you know, the job becomes very much running the company, right? And it's obviously I think normal CEO stuff. You're doing cheerleading for the company, you're setting vision, you're managing and building the kind of leadership team and helping to coach and grow that next level of leader. But it's funny you should mention it. Like last year, we were I had this feeling we needed to rewrite the tech platform. It was built for 10 years ago, a different time. Social was so different. And I felt like I was disconnected from our clients' problems because so much of my focus is running the company and helping to run the kind of much larger accounts for our multi-billion dollar clients who have much different problems than most companies. Um, and so we actually did this, we put up this landing page saying that you could hire me as your intern. Um, and we made a couple like little ads about it. But we had like 200 companies apply to hire me as an intern, and then I went and I did 6 internships for a full day, embedded myself in these companies, made sure they weren't customers of ours, and used that experience to, one, I wanted to feel closer to the work and to be able to inform where products should go, what we needed to build, how we needed to change that platform. And so we just launched that last month, the revised version of the platform, which many of those insights came out of that internship. And so I think some of what I do outside of the normal CEO stuff is just like where's the biggest fire burning in the company, and can I go like, I because I don't own the client relationships and because I don't have you know all of our employees reporting into me and don't have to manage all of them. Like in some ways, I have more flexibility than other people to like jump into something that's burning or pursue an opportunity that is outside the scope of like normal kind of everyday what we are doing. And enjoy that stuff. So it's nice to be able to kind of do some of that as well.
Is there something that like, I guess how are you prepared for that before? Because it sounds like you had a Tumblr account, you had a camera, you're a creator. How did you go from that to sort of being like you know, a delegator and a did you sort of have that entrepreneurial spirit early on, or a
Yeah.
mentor, or anything that kind of helped you get there?
I've had a lot of mentors and a lot of help, certainly. I always wanted to run a business. I before this, I started a lot of things that did not work, that were much smaller. I had a cycling apparel company. I had a tie company. I had a record label. I had a photography magazine. Like I would do all these little things. Anytime I'd get like 10 or 15 grand saved up in my bank account, I would go blow it on some stupid idea that would make no money. And so I'd been practicing failing for quite some time. And then, for the first few years were really hard. We were so early. Nobody knew what this stuff was. Nobody knew I mean, the influencer didn't exist as a word, obviously. And so the growth was, it was just survival for so many years. And the growth was pretty slow in those first years, which helped me like mature and grow up. I mean, looking back, I'm really glad we didn't, we weren't able to go raise big rounds of financing because I think I wouldn't have suffered as much and I wouldn't have learned as much. And I actually think if we had been able to raise $10 million dollars in the first year, that the company probably wouldn't exist anymore. And so that struggle in those first years helped mature me quite a bit. Um, and I think the reality of being an entrepreneur is that I think you have to have that fire to continue to try and find the next step, the next level. And what's so hard about this job is there's often not there's nobody telling you what that next level is. There's nobody telling you when the things that you are doing, the way you're spending your week no longer makes sense for you and you have to try something else. I think that I try and I've built a great group of advisors and mentors. We have a great board that helps me out. But it's funny, in the last couple of years, I find myself trying to remind myself to trust the instincts more, and that like the the reason I started this business and I quit my job and I went, like instincts drove a lot of my best decisions, probably some of my worst ones as well. But it's been helpful to be able to check those, what your instincts are telling you with a group of people who've done it before. But yeah, it's the constant struggle. I feel like is that I race bikes here in New York, and you know you can see in a bike race that like if you're not constantly passing someone and constantly trying to move up, all of a sudden you're like in the back of the race.
Uh,
And so like trying to just stay where you are actually puts you in the back because the race the whole time people are moving up. And so um I feel like that's so true in business as well, right? That like if you stop focusing maniacally on growing yourself and the business, that all of a sudden it starts, slipping away like sand through your hands, and it can be like too late to fix it.
yeah, no, that metaphor definitely resonates with me. I guess I want to double click on the recording on the record company as well for a second. I know that
Oh
might
yeah.
be in another life, but just kind of curious what your connection to music is.
So love music. I love the guitars behind you. I've always just been, you know, um, deeply into music. I was on Tumblr many years ago, and I heard this song by this kid Nick Waterhouse. He was like a you know 60s kind of like he was making very like 60s soul music almost, but like a little white kid in San Francisco. And he had this song. I was like, just well, it was amazing. And I emailed him and I was like, "What? Do you have any other music?" And he's like, "No, I don't have any money to record anything, but I've got songs written." And I was like, well, I've got again 10 or 15 grand. What's it going to cost? He's like, I need like $8,000 to record this album. And I was like, great, you can have this money. And we did a little album together. Of course, I almost instantly got fired from my job. And so I was like, that money became a little bit more important, but he ended up, pretty quickly getting signed to like an actual legitimate label and going on and being quite successful. He's made a bunch of music with Leon Bridges, and he's kind of in that world. But it was a good like, speaking of instincts, like I feel like I did a lot of things when I was younger that failed, but were the right idea. Like Nick getting signed to a big label and me having had found him and not found him, but like, heard his music. I reached out to him. I said, let's just do it. Let's make an album. Um, I felt like that was like validation that like, okay, the execution was wrong.
Yeah.
This was the wrong gig for me. I definitely learned that like managing an artist wasn't something I wanted to do, but the instinct was
Yeah.
right, and I had a few other things like that, these little side projects that I did where I was like, yes, it technically failed, or I didn't have enough money or skill to do what I wanted, but then somebody else would do something very, very similar and it was successful. And I was like, okay, I was right. Like it was a good idea. It was crappy execution. So then when this idea about creating Fohr came up and it felt much bigger and it felt like, I'd had 4 or 5 of those small little projects that I'd launched and kind of walked away from it. That made me realize enough that like this is a big idea. This is, this, like, all those other things were just me like getting the muscle memory for how do you, even starting the LLC, just doing it, like putting it out into the world. So yeah, the things like the record label were super helpful. I still have some of the little singles. I just saw that actually that little album we made is like incredibly rare and is selling for like hundreds of dollars on eBay, which is kind of fun.
That is really cool, and it's really cool that it is validating. You saw a talent, you recognized that, you invested in it, and it did succeed. I mean, do you feel like that became like analogous to like when you're finding creators that you're wanting to work with, that you recognize their talent, or brands that you feel are you're going to be able to give them a great return on investment? Do you think that just sort of that vision of seeing talent has sort of been a win for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think that for us, it probably manifests less in like a specific talent because, now the scale, the business, I think right now we're probably working with 1,200 influencers or something across our clients' campaigns, and I'm not as involved. But being able to, I think, sense where the world is going and where our brands need to go and how they need to show up, I think that it's given a lot of confidence for us to say, you know, this is what um, this is where things are going. This is where you need to be. I mean, for years, our vision is for the last 5 years, our kind of vision statement has been that we say influencer marketing is going to be the dominant form of brand communication. So this is going to be like the dominant form of advertising. 5 years ago, like literally nobody agreed with that statement. Um, Now, I wouldn't say everybody agrees, but like increasingly it's looking like we were right. And I think that, again, that like having that track record over a decade, almost a decade and a half now of things where it's like, oh, we were right about that. We were right about that. We were right about that. It gives you that confidence to say like that little niggling voice, that thing that you are feeling, like you should act on it because you've been right about a lot of other things, and the probability that you're right about this one is higher. And for our clients, I think, helping them, especially the bigger legacy brands, right? Helping them show up in culture and join these conversations is, it's a really fun but like complex task actually. Like, and this is the fundamental shift in advertising, and why I think influencer and social platforms, all of this is like the biggest shift since World War II, when everyone moved to the suburbs and scaled media as we know it was created, and thus advertising as we know it. But like since the 50s, the playbook has been the same. A brand comes up with their story they want to tell. They use paid media to tell that story, and the majority of customers are finding out about brands and their products from the brands. But now the majority of people are finding out about brands from people. And there's no longer, you can't pay to get into these conversations as effectively. And so your job as a marketer becomes, well, how do I curate the conversations I want happening? How do I encourage people to tell the story that I want told? How do I amplify the ones that are working? It's, I think a big part of that is helping brands, know where the puck is going, and the challenge and becomes like getting these, again, multi-billion-dollar companies to move really quickly, which is not what they're used to.
Are they more hip to it now, you would say, than, I mean, in the past? Do you think that the especially the legacy brands, are they more do they understand the value that you bring? Do you have to sort of sell it less? And do they really recognize the return on investment that you're showing them? Are they how clear are they
Mhm.
about what you're doing?
I think the realization that not building a strength in this, not like if they as an organization can't figure out how to make influencer work for them and they can't figure out how to scale it, that's an existential risk. Not
Right.
today, not a year from now, but like it's going to be increasingly important. I mean, look at the fastest growing consumer brands in the world. Most of them are, they're either influencer first, and that's the core of their strategy, or they're literally started by, celebrity slash influencers, right? So I think even from a performance standpoint, you know, brands look at what Skims or, Poppy or Olipop or something are doing, and they say, okay, yep, if I could snap my fingers and do more of that, would I? Yes. Now, you know, what we still deal with is that media consumption and media spend are still wildly disparate. I think brands accept their customers are spending more and more time on social, but they are still spending significantly more on other legacy platforms and places, because that's what, brands, they've got like last year itis. They do iterative change. They're not doing like, zero budgeting. They don't say, okay, we spent 2% of our ad budget on influencer next year. Should it be 5% this year? Like, I would love those kind of changes from the bigger companies, but it's more like we spent 2%. What about 2.2% this
Yeah.
next year? And then, and look, maybe it'll be like the Hemingway, how do you go broke gradually, then suddenly? And like, I do think that we'll probably have these iterative changes, and then we're going to get more CMOs who are like coming from influencer and social, and like we'll see a much bigger shift, and it won't matter that I've been buying media from the same salesperson for 15 years, and they give me his ticket to the Super Bowl every year, and so like I feel like I'm going to keep doing that, right? Like things will change, but that storytelling is still a big part of what we're doing inside these companies. Is like there is a belief, but turning belief into spend still takes a good amount of work.
Yeah. How has the rise in TikTok changed things? And when there's been some scare about it going away at times, how has that affected your?
Yeah. I mean, TikTok has changed so much. I mean, I'd say 3 or 4 years ago, 85% of the sponsored content we did was a photo and a caption. I think we're like 90% video now. So short form video, obviously has changed everything. The other big change is that increasingly, especially on TikTok and increasingly on Instagram, you're following your algorithm, not a set of people. And so performance is so much more variable. And, whereas if you looked at, again, 5 years ago, and a creator got, let's say they generally reached 30% of their audience, there would be a 5 to 10% variance on that performance. Sometimes they'd reach 25%, sometimes they'd reach 35%. That was it, right? Now you take someone who has average is reaching 30% of their audience, but sometimes they're reaching 3%, sometimes they're reaching 300%. The spikes are much larger. And so that means we have to work harder on strategy. We need to work harder to make sure the creative is good. It used to not matter because an audience was following a creator, and if a post wasn't their best, it would still get in front of them,
Yeah.
because the audience was kind of locked in. That's not true anymore. And so we've invested really heavily in the last couple of years in on our strategy team and in making sure we are doing a lot more work on the upfront to land on the right strategy and then to find the right creators to do that, bring those creators to the table, tell them what the KPIs and the goals are of the brand, help them to be able to pitch us concepts because, there are, multiple hundreds of percent swings in performance that you can have with the same creator. And so that we feel like the highest impact thing we can do for a brand is make sure the content does well and overperforms and gets in front of more eyeballs. And that also, you know, performance in those organic posts is driving performance in the paid as well. And so the better a post performs organically, the better it's going to perform in paid and the more ROI they're going to get out of it.
How many, when your strategy team is working with the content creators, could it be like a lot of different takes, a lot of different ideas that the creator has to do before you guys land on one that kind of goes to publish?
It's a good question. We try not to put too much of that on the creators, especially they're quite expensive. It's increasingly difficult to create this content and it takes a long time. We also have this model where like we don't spend the same amount of time on every partnership with every influencer, right? Like if they have 10,000 or 20,000 followers, we're going to give them a brief, we're going to give them guardrails, and we're going to let them, do their thing. We may not even have content review and approve it. If they have 10 million followers and we're working on some sort of series or piece of like kind of much more scripted content, we're going to spend months on that sometimes. And so we will go back and forth on concepting, but we do look at that like, how big is the audience? What's the opportunity cost here? How much can we trust the person? And try not to do a lot of reshoots. Now where we are trying to move to from a technology standpoint is building out a system whereby the creator can upload their content and we can have a prediction of performance because ultimately we have, hundreds of millions of posts that we have data on. We have every post from the influencer. And so we can look at that post and predict how well or how poorly it's going to do. And so in the future, we'll be able to make sure that we don't have posts that really bomb, but that we can also steer the creator towards things that are going to perform better.
Interesting. I mean, you guys are kind of a deal maker in a way because you're kind of juggling, two,
Mhm.
I think of myself and I do a lot of work in creative recruitment, and I'm always juggling the candidate and the client, and just kind of juggling two separate entities. In a way, you guys are kind of juggling the brand and you're juggling the creator.
Mhm.
How often do you let them communicate together without you in the middle? How does that
Yeah.
relationship work?
Yeah, we want the brand to have a relationship with the creator. We don't represent influencers and so we don't see our value in creating a like barrier between the brand and the influencer. Our value should be in our ability to, come up with a strategy that works, to be able to execute the campaign at a higher level than they would be able to do on their, better reporting, all of that. So, um, you know, especially with bigger relationships, the brand wants to, they want to know these people and we'll see the brand sometimes work with the creator on their own outside of work that they do with us. Like, and honestly, that's a W. I feel like that's a W for us. And it means we really got that right. And we'll even on some of the bigger deals, like the brand wants to be the first person to reach out to like make the offer. It's totally fine. We'll just be like, yeah, put us on CC and we'll take care of it from there. But it's exciting to offer someone a big contract and the brand wants to make sure the creator knows that this is coming from them and they're really excited about it. So I think the relationship side is so important. Now, most of our clients really appreciate having a barrier between themselves and the creators, not because they don't want to have a relationship, but because if you work with 1,000 influencers in a year, that's 1,000 different email threads, and that's probably 800 talent managers and it's an enormous amount of back and forth and work. And so we increasingly like make sure they get all the good stuff from the relationships and all the benefits, and that we're taking all the frustrations, so that it can just be a really positive experience for them.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious just because I'm a serial problem solver, wondering, and obviously I want to keep everything positive. This is a great chance to
Yeah.
talk about successes. We can get into that right after. But curious, if there's any pain points in the industry right now that you could share, any sort of struggles. I'd be interested in knowing, just in case I can solve all of those problems for you.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one one is that the industry is in this period of change where, influencers increasingly moving to the center of what brands are doing. Um, and it's, it's creating some conflict inside of these organizations. Um, you know, they have budgets everybody is fighting for. Um, and, the ownership of influencers often shifting around now that it's becoming this big growth area. I think more departments want to take it and own it so it can be theirs. It just means that you know, we can work with a client for a year or two, and sometimes it's two or three different people that are owning it, and it's just kind of bouncing around inside of an organization. That's a challenge. Another is, just from a business model, is that it's different. It's unique because we're doing strategy, we're like dealing with creative, but we're also doing distribution, and the clients don't know exactly how to pay us. Some of them think, well, this is media, and so they want to pay the way that they buy media, but it's so much more intensive and so much more work to do it. And so I think figuring out, you know, because it's consolidating, sometimes what two or three different agencies or one agency would have that, two or three different practices. They'd have a strategy scope, a creative scope, and a media. Well, if it's all the same thing, how do you pay for it? And I think that's a constant conversation. And again, it's a human business. You can't, it is harder than coming up with great creative. And then you just can say, okay, let's go put $20 million behind this creative. And that's like easy. And one person can do that. Now, spending $20 million on influencer is, you're probably going to need a team of at least 6 or 7 people. It's hugely intensive and difficult. And so, I think for everyone, it's like how do we get this to the scale it needs to be impactful for these huge organizations without having agency fees that are um, that they can't feel like they can pay.
Yeah.
So that's where technology comes in, and some innovation there.
Cool. Well, it's got kind of two questions left for you here. One, I'd love to hear any real success stories that you feel like maybe most proud of in your careers. Any certain campaign or project that you that's a standout to you?
Yeah, I mean, we uh really proud of, recently we just had one that is recent that I'm really excited about. But we launched what's called the varsity team for Dick's Sporting Goods. It was based off some work, similar to some work we had done with Sephora and the Sephora squad. But the idea being for brands that have, these customer bases that are passionate and really love the brand, that like the best way to find the group of influencers you want to work with is to run an open application. And so, we did that for Dick's. We just got 5,000 people who applied for, 30 spots as an ambassador. Their total reach for all of those people was 380 million followers for all of those applicants. And so we've got Olympians in there, pro athletes, college athletes, just like enthusiasts. But we're going to find this group of people who are deeply passionate about sport and about Dick's, and who have taken the time to apply, raise their hand, say, I want this, and explain why they think they'd be a good fit. And it's going back to my original idea about trying to create this more egalitarian way to connect with brands. And ultimately, this is a job, and jobs should be listed publicly. Anyone should be able to apply for them, right? And the influencer space is unique in that they're not, these deals are just done by somebody finds somebody, they reach out and they hire them. Like imagine if your only way to get a job was sit around and wait for someone
Yeah,
to give you a job, right? And it would be hard for if you were more up and coming than to compete. And so, we love running these kind of application based processes. And this will be, I think twice as hard to get in as Harvard from a percentage standpoint. So we're really excited to launch and the group that is going to be the creators for Dix this year.
that's really cool. Anything that you do for your just to keep yourself sane outside of work? Any hobbies, things you enjoy?
Well, yeah, lots, I was just, we were talking about bike racing.
Yeah.
I was on the bike this morning in Central Park. That really helps. I, I still carry a camera around with me every day. I switched from digital to film recently, but I still love shooting. And, you got the guitars behind you. Like, I also like to like come home at night and play guitar sometimes and just like totally disconnect. But I think keeping the hobbies going is super important, especially since, this is it's a hard job. Life is hard for everyone. I think you gotta make sure you have those outlets.
Yeah. Cool, man. Well, thank you so much for being on
Thank
here
you.
and chatting with me. You've been a real pleasure. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the people that are listening are also going to get a lot of value from the conversation. So yeah, man, have a great rest of your week, and I really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, James, be well, man.
Cheers.
Bye.